He opened his eyes a crack. Where was he again? Oh yeah, some inn in Seoul society. And it was a stupid inn, he decided to himself. Making them have the same living quarters. Even though, they couldn't really do anything about it. He closed his eyes again, letting the hot water soak his body properly. It wasn't that it had been such a grueling journey, it was just that, it had been such a long time since he had relaxed like this. Back at home every relaxing moment could be broken by the presence of a hollow. In the court of pure souls there weren't hollows, but it couldn't be exactly called peaceful. His thoughts were interrupted as a familiar voice spoke from behind the sliding doors. Oi! Ichigo, hurry up! Rukia! Ichigo grimaced to himself, as though it took effort to even think about leaving the bath. Okay, I'm going, just give me a second, he mumbled softly. He didn't know whether she could hear it, but he didn't really care. Sighing, he lowered himself into the bath once more, then jumped out of the water, and onto the side. The night wind blew onto his body, and he shivered. Ah, why wasn't the bath an indoor one? Ichigo. All right already. Then he lowered his voice, remembering that there were other tenants, and they wouldn't be very happy with his loud voice. I'm going. Jeez. He made his way over to where his clothes were. As he put on the sleepwear provided by the inn, he wondered to himself what the hell was wrong with those clothes he had been wearing. When he got into the bath, he quickly ran over the GI and Hakama. But, everything looked perfectly fine. Then why did everyone have such a shock when they saw him wearing it? Lost in thought, he gathered up the remaining clothes, forgetting to tighten up his robe. He slid open the sliding door to find Rukia sitting with her back to the wall on the opposite side of the room. On her lap was, oh no, was that, a drawing pad? She looked up at him, and smiled secretly to herself that he was carrying the clothes he had worn before, all disheveled. He groaned, and then said, ah, that was good. He then proceeded to dump the garments on the floor, including his wet towel. He hoped that he wouldn't have to look at her drawings. Seriously. They sucked. Ichigo, she scolded, and scooted over to where he stood, looking puzzled. What? He asked. Did this girl just read his mind? Don't dump the clothes on the floor. Fold them properly. She shook her head as picked up his GI and Hakama. Men. Ichigo joined her on the ground as she picked up his clothes. Phew. She looked back up tell Ichigo that he should go hang his towel, but she was stopped short by his loose hanging bed robe. He had leant over to pick up his towel, and his well-toned muscles were in clear view. She had to mentally slap herself to stop herself from staring. Sure, she had acknowledged that Ichigo did have muscles, but seeing his body so close, and still slightly damp, gave her feelings that she didn't even want to comprehend. Ichigo noticed that she had stopped halfway in picking his clothes up and turned to her face questioningly. He saw her face slightly red, and then she turned away from him. Huh? Was she still feeling the side effects from her faint earlier? Oi, Rukia, what's wrong? His voice snapped her out of her dreamlike state. She looked at Ichigo, his face now very close to hers. He looked worried, but his proximity set off sparks in her skin she didn't know existed. She quickly turned her head away from his face, so that he wouldn't be able to see her blushing as much. It's nothing. She said, not meeting his searching gaze. Ichigo looked at the side of her face, bewildered, but he could see her face getting redder and redder. But you're getting redder and redder. Maybe you're getting a fever. And no, it's not that. She didn't meet his eyes. He could tell she was lying, but he knew Rukia. She wouldn't tell him the truth if his life depended on it. Damn it, Rukia. I'm frickin' worried about you, is what he wanted to say, but he zipped his lips. He was worried about her before, as well, when she just suddenly passed out on the road. Maybe she was hiding something from him. He sat back, away from her. Rukia was thankful for the distance between them, but somewhat regretful. After a few moments of awkward silence, Ichigo simply said, "Well, I'll go to bed." Rukia looked up at him, and didn't miss the hurt look on his face. But, what was she to do? She couldn't exactly tell him that she had been blushing because she had been so close to his body. She softened her voice. "Okay." Without another word, she folded the clothes he had been wearing, and placed them in a neat pile at the foot of their futon, while Ichigo silently hung his towel up. She could tell he was hurt because she didn't say anything. Ichigo was one of those types. He didn't really react when people got angry with him loudly, or verbally, and even physically, but when someone didn't tell him things he wanted to know. She slid open the door of the bath, and then closed it behind her. She looked at the wide bath ahead of her. They were in a couple's room, so it was made for two people. But, since her and Ichigo weren't a couple, she could have the whole bath to herself. She temporarily wondered what would it be like, bathing at the same time as Ichigo, then immediately dismissed the thought, furiously blushing. What had possessed her to think things like that? Actually, when had she thought of things like that, would be the better question, she thought as she unbuttoned her yellow blouse. Now, how did she get this thing off again, she wondered to herself as she tugged and pulled her white top. She felt around the back area, and found that there were many little strings that were tied together. Crap. She had forgotten that this top she had got from the real world was a real puzzler when it came to putting it on and taking it off. Even when she put it on in Kakaku's place, the Shiba woman had to help her, and even then, they didn't get it on until after the third try. Rukia took in a deep breath, and tried to untie the first knot. Crap. The other woman had tied the shirt so securely, with knots that were probably made for holding up cannons. Rukia sighed. She would never get it off. She temporarily entertained the thought of bathing with it, but decided against it. She didn't want to wear a wet top to bed, especially when it was white. And, especially with Ichigo. She sat on one of the rocks on the side of the bath, trying to figure out what to do. She turned her head to the now closed sliding door. Maybe Ichigo could give her a hand, and oh. What was she thinking? Rukia blushed furiously. Besides, he was probably asleep. After a couple of minutes of struggling with the iron knots that Kakaku had made, she sighed, and stood up. Here goes nothing. DMNU Kakaku. It's almost as if you knew this would happen. Back at the Shiba stronghold, Kakaku released a sneeze. Wiping her nose, she grinned, and continued drinking sake. He, Rukia must have found out by now. Her brother took one look at the evil grin forming on his sister's face and he carefully backed out the door. Rukia slid open the sliding door timidly. Ichigo was already lying down on the futon. Judging by constant rising of the covers, he was asleep. She paused in the doorway, suddenly self-conscious. Finally gathering up her courage, she got down on her hands and knees and crawled to the futon. As she neared, she could hear Ichigo's soft breathing, and she smiled to herself, as she noticed that his permanent frown was gone. Without, he looked somewhat peaceful, he decided. However, there was a tinge of worry that clouded his face, and Rukia knew it was because of his family. She knelt by the futon silently, marveling on how different Ichigo looked when he slept. A stray strand of hair had fallen across his closed eyes, and instinctively Rukia brushed it away softly. She didn't let her hand leave his face, instead she caressed his cheek, reminding her again that Ichigo was barely an adult, but yet, he had to carry so many burdens upon himself. He was just too many things at once, she decided to herself. He had to be an older brother for Yuzu and Karen, a high school student, and also a Shinigami. Because they had no mother, Ichigo almost had to double for a mother, placing loads of stress upon him. His soft breathing reminded her of what she really came here for, and she blushed, wondering how she could get so carried away. She withdrew her hand from his cheek, and his eyelids fluttered. Carefully she leant over his sleeping body, tucking in strands of hair that had fallen because she was now facing downwards, behind her ear. Ichigo, she murmured softly. Ichigo stirred slightly. Ichigo, she said again, moving down closer to his face so she wouldn't have to speak louder. Some of her hair fell on his face, tickling his breathing. This time cracked open his eyes to see Rukia's face only inches from his. He closed his eyes again, and then brushed away some of the hairs that had fallen on his face, and frowned slightly. That tickles, Rukia. The next few seconds were silent. Ichigo opened his eyes wide, and jumped backwards out of the futon, crashing into the wall behind him. Rukia. He pointed a shaking finger at her as he sat, back to the wall. The hell are you doing? Rukia smiled inwardly at the contrast between the sleeping Ichigo and the awake Ichigo. Then she frowned at him. He frowned back. What? He wasn't very happy that he had been disturbed in his sleep, and frightened awake by the proximity of Rukia's face. Rukia let her mouth open slightly. She thought that he would be a bit more understanding, asking her what she wanted, but all she got was a rough, "What?" She huffed, and then turned away from him. Well, I was just going to ask for your help with this frickin' shirt, but since you need your sleep so much, I won't, she said. Still speaking with her back towards him. No response. That loser. She got up and walked back to the bath sliding doors. When she turned around to close them she looked angrily at the shocked sitting form of Ichigo at the other side of the room. Served him right. He should learn how to respect a woman's wishes, even though she very well knew that Ichigo was just being Ichigo. She slid the sliding door to its closed position with such velocity that it vibrated for a couple of seconds after it was actually closed. Great. Now she couldn't take off the stupid shirt, and Ichigo wasn't going to help her because she had just gotten angry over some little thing. Ichigo just sat there dazed. Crap. Rukia was angry at him. Again. What did she want? Rukia began to regret wearing these clothes. She turned away from the sliding door to retrieve her blouse, which was lying on a bench, at the other side of the rock pool. She didn't hear him slide the door open, and approach her from behind. In fact, she gasped when she felt his hands grab her shoulders. Ichigo. Ichigo didn't say anything, but sat her down on a stool nearby. What are you doing, Ichigo? She managed to get out as he applied soft pressure to her shoulders to make her sit down. For some reason, him touching her had a direct effect on her voice. Shut up. She felt his hands slide down from her shoulders to the first knot. As he fumbled with the knot she felt his fingers touch her skin. She was glad she wasn't facing him because she had started turning red. Ichigo, on the other hand, wasn't faring as well either. He was just glad that she wasn't looking at him, because his face had gone the same color as Rinji's hair. It was hard to concentrate on the task before him, as he kept on touching Rukia's soft back in the process of untying the knots. It didn't help that the knots were tied so intricately tight. Absent-mindedly he wondered who had tied the knots up so tight. Neither said anything, and finally Ichigo let out a sigh of relief as he undid the first knot. He started on the second knot, trying to ignore the soft skin that had just been revealed. It became harder and harder to untie the knots, because at each knot he untied, a fresh portion of Rukia's back was revealed to him. He knew he should have started at the bottom knot first. He tried to ignore it, but her skin felt so soft, so warm. He finished untying the last knot, but for some reason his hands wouldn't leave her back. Rukia felt the last knot come undone, and she sighed inwardly. But inside her somewhere, she knew that she didn't want him to go. His hands were still on her back, she noticed. There. Finished, she heard him say quietly. Ichigo turned away, not looking at her bare back. Don't go, she wanted to say, but instead she said, oh, thank you. Ichigo made the mistake of looking at the milky complexion of her back again, and something snapped inside of him. He let his hands slowly slide up her bare back, which sent sparks all down her spine. Rukia's face heated up instantly, and she stifled a mm. What was he doing? She didn't move, the only thought that was going through her head was that it felt so. Ichigo, as if realizing what he had just done, tore his hands away from her back. I'll be inside. And with that, he straightened up, and walked back to the sliding door with great effort. After he closed the sliding door he collapsed against it. What the hell was that all about, he thought to himself. He lifted his hand to his heart. Hell, it was beating at a gazillion miles an hour. What the hell, he thought again. It's just Rukia. Why did I do that? Rukia slowly climbed out of the outdoor bath. Her face still burned after what Ichigo had done. But, somehow, she wanted him to do it again. She couldn't quite pin the feeling, but it felt good. It wasn't anything serious, she told herself decidedly. She retrieved her clothes, her glance briefly resting on the top that she had worn. She shook her head, trying to erase any thoughts that came to her mind. She dried herself off with the towel, and eased herself into the nightwear provided. Thankful that it was darker inside the room so that he wouldn't have to see her blush, she silently opened the sliding door. She looked at the sleeping form of Ichigo. Should she act mad, or angry in the morning? Should she tell him that she liked what he had done? No, that would be something a child would do. But still. She rubbed her head. This was too much thinking, and it was way too late in the night. She eased herself silently onto the futon, next to him, but sleep did not come, even though she was tired. A summer job, business trip, Part 4. Ichigo stirred as he felt something disrupt his futon. Well, not something, but someone, because he could feel the warmth radiating from their body. In his half-sleep he cracked open one of his eyelids. What the? He saw her smooth outline, even underneath the covers, with her back towards him. Ugh. He was really tired. He didn't have time for Rukia to be playing games. He kept his one eye opened, just to wait for Rukia to turn around and ask him playfully if he was scared. No such luck. He began to wonder when Rukia would stop playing her stupid games and go to her bed. Hold on. Her bed? In his drowsiness he remembered that there was only one bed in the middle of the room. Crap. He exhaled loudly, and then turned around ever so slightly as to not disturb the sleeping Rukia. Even after he closed his one open eye he didn't drift off to sleep like he expected his tired body to automatically do. Instead, he became acutely aware of the girl that lay only inches from him. In the silence of the night he heard her soft breathing, accentuated by the slight rise and fall of the blankets. His hair on the back of his neck pricked at each sound. 10 minutes later, though it seemed to Ichigo hours, he still couldn't get to sleep. He tried counting sheep, but that didn't work. He tried counting Zanpakutos but he ran out of names. He tried to count all the people in the Godai, 13, but because he had only been with them a short time, that soon failed as well. In his restlessness, he kept moving around, trying not to disturb Rukia, but he knew he was failing. Well, it wasn't his fault that she decided to sleep on the same freaking futon as him. Even though, he conceded, she would have nowhere else to sleep. Rukia's eyelids fluttered before opening them. Various movements had been disturbing her ever since she slept. Being a reasonable sleeper, she had unconsciously ignored them, but at some point they became irritating. She slowly turned around to see Ichigo fidgeting, twisting and turning. She groaned. Of course it would be Ichigo. Damn it, Ichigo, can you stop moving, she said, trying to sound quiet. Ichigo rolled over to his side to face her, looking surprised that she had woken at all. Huh? I said, could you stop moving? I'm trying to sleep here, she snapped, irritated that he hadn't properly heard her the first time. Yeah, I should be sleeping well, as well, you know, how I always sleep with girls and all, he retorted sarcastically. It's not easy. Oh, for goodness sake. I'm not going to bite you, Rukia said a little bit louder. Boomf. Ichigo promptly rolled onto his other side, leaving his back to an annoyed Rukia. Things quietened down after that, but she could still feel Ichigo squirming. This wouldn't do, she decided. She couldn't understand his dilemma in her half-waked state. All she realized was that she desperately needed sleep, it provided an escape for her mind, and also a mending experience for her body. Every move he made affected her since they were sharing the same blanket. She was about to scream something at the back of Ichigo, but she bit her lip to bite back words she might regret later. Still, Ichigo moved like a garden snake and she needed to do something about it. Rukia sighed. She needed her sleep, and he needed his too. In her drowsy mind, she did the only thing she thought reasonable. She ventured towards him, towards his moving back. Without warning she placed her arms around Ichigo's neck to stop him from moving. He stopped all right, but it was like he was dead. She smiled to herself. That kept him quiet. She closed her eyes, pulling closer to the warmth of his body. Ichigo, on the other side of the bed, kept closing his eyes and opening them. He wanted to move, but Rukia's grip was surprisingly strong. When he felt her push herself into his back, he felt like his head was going to explode. What was this woman thinking? Didn't she know that guys did have feelings? And her proximity awakened feelings that he didn't want to begin to comprehend. He felt her relax a tiny bit, and then wondered to himself if she had actually gone to sleep. After about 5 minutes of debating on what to do, it took so long because he kept getting distracted by the closeness of Rukia, he finally decided to turn over, in her arms. That way he would be facing her, and could, forcibly remove her from him. He was, after all, stronger than her. If she stayed like this the whole night, he would definitely not get any sleep. At all. He pulled back into her body, ignoring her softness, to get some slack on her arms. He twisted around on the futon, trying not to wake her. It was easier than he imagined, but when he turned around, expecting to meet her sleeping face, he met two wide-open eyes. Their gaze held. Instantly awake, Ichigo tried to drag away, but her deep, dark blue orbs drew him into her. It was like he was staring into the opening of her soul. And she stared right back at his deep brown eyes. Not breaking their gaze, she said softly, "I thought I told you not to move." "Oh," he said, looking embarrassed. He looked away, but he did not move away from her embrace. "I needed to get comfortable." "So, this is comfortable?" she asked him softly, while raising an eyebrow. Actually." He tried to say, blushing furiously. She shook her head, cutting him off. "Shush." With that she pulled herself into him, closing her eyes as she laid her head on his shoulder. It took some moments before he registered what she had done. Rukia lay there, almost falling asleep, when she felt his hands encircle her. She waited for any other movements, but she heard him breathing evenly. He was asleep, she decided. She let out a small sigh against his clothes. Finally. She almost yelped when he whispered in her ear. His hot breath tickled the side of her face. "Rukia." She squeezed her eyes tightly to take her mind off the spreading heat on her face. "Can you tell me, why was everyone acting all weird when I put on those clothes?" His voice was husky from sleepiness, and he sounded attractive, almost, she decided, before chiding herself for even entertaining the thought. When she gave no answer, he sighed loudly. "I guess it was some kind of joke, huh?" Without loosening his grip on her he said quietly, "Sorry. I just couldn't sleep when I was worrying over some little thing like that." She opened her eyes after it was clear he wasn't going to say any more. "It wasn't some little thing." She whispered softly into his shoulder. She felt him jerk slightly, as if surprised she was awake. "Actually." She sighed, and forced herself to pull away from his warm grasp. Holding him at an arm's length, she studied him. His orange hair was ruffled on the pillow, and his sad brown eyes looked back at her. She sighed again. "Ichigo." He didn't take his gaze off her. "Ichigo, you look like someone I knew," she said, hurt flashing briefly in her eyes as she remembered the face of Kaien. She then broke away from his embrace, and rolled over to her side, her back facing him. She heard a soft grunt from him. She closed her eyes, regretting her last decision. She wanted to sleep in his secure arms, but, she gasped softly, and her eyes opened fully, as he embraced her from behind. "It's okay," he said softly, speaking into her hair. Her eyes stayed wide open. "It's okay, if you don't want to talk about it," he repeated, his voice muffled slightly by her hair. Ichigo had seen the hurt look in her eyes when she said those words to him. Above anything else, he didn't want her feeling hurt because of something he asked. Oh well, her past would have to stay hidden for the meantime, he decided, as he felt her relax against his embrace. She reached down and held his hands around her waist. "Thank you." He heard her murmur as they both drifted into sleep, troubled, but happy. The first thing she was aware of was the sound of Ichigo's breathing. The next thing she was aware of was the cold. During the night, the temperature had dropped, and she involuntarily shivered. She didn't bother to glance behind her to know that Ichigo was there. He was still holding her, although it was a bit looser than the night before. She freed one of her arms and pulled the covers over them. Still cold, she twisted in his embrace and snuggled into him, trying to glean what body warmth she could. She smiled softly and closed her eyes, remembering that there were no morning meetings to go to. As she lay there she could feel his hot breath against the top of her head, but she liked it, because it was reassuring of his presence. She snuggled closer to him. She then heard him murmur wanly, "Rukia." She blushed immediately, and on impulse moved slightly out of his embrace. The small movement caused Ichigo to open his eyes a crack. "Oh, Rukia." He muttered again, then closed his eyes, smiling slightly. "Rukia." His eyes shot open, and he jumped back on the futon, taking all the blankets with him. Rukia tried to look angry, but instead she was completely surprised as the morning coldness hit her hard. She yelped, and dived into Ichigo's cowering form. Now wasn't the time to be angry. Now was the time to get out of the cold. She tugged the blankets from Ichigo, who was clutching them tightly, wondering why the hell he was sleeping next to Rukia. The next few minutes ensured a tug-of-war, and tangled bed sheets. Because Ichigo wouldn't let go of the blankets, he inevitably pulled her towards him. She landed on top of him, and his brown eyes met her dark blue orbs. The kicking, screaming, and yelling that had just been evident a second ago, died away to a few huffs and puffs. "This was like last night," Rukia heard a voice in her head say excitedly. She continued looking into his deep brown eyes, searching for some meaning. Ichigo was vaguely aware of her weight on his chest, but he didn't move. Looking into her eyes, he remembered what he actually was doing, sleeping next to Rukia. They were at the inn, with the annoying attendant. The room they were in had only one futon. He suddenly blushed, aware of their proximity. If she didn't move soon, he was bound to do something that he would, not regret, but something that would hurt their relationship. He watched as her face moved closer to his, strands of loose raven-colored hair fell on his face, but he didn't bother to blow them off. Her approaching face reminded him of the time when they had lunch together. But this time, there was no excuse. That time, he had just been lucky that there was something to blame that. He refused to say out loud that he had kissed her, but in his head, thousands of voices were chorusing that he had, in fact, kissed her. He had to stop whatever he was thinking of doing. "Rukia." His voice snapped her out of her trance and she looked at his blushing face. She shook her head a little. How could she think about his blushing face, when she herself was blushing furiously? What had she been thinking? She just saw his deep brown eyes, and then she felt compelled to move forward. Rukia." She flew back to reality. Oh. She stuttered. Sorry." "No, it's okay," he assured her. His gaze betrayed what he was going to say next. She didn't move. Or rather, couldn't. Rukia," Ichigo said, his face heating up. He couldn't take much more of this. Her face mirrored his. "I can't." "What?" She frowned, still blushing. I can't move." "Oh great. He was going die. Rukia on top of him, he could handle for a bit. Rukia on top of him, and couldn't get off, his mind nearly exploded. Why? He asked the first question that popped into his head. The blankets. She said, breathing heavily. Ichigo couldn't take it anymore. Using his feet as a pivot point, he used his arms to push himself forward. Without looking her in the eye, he pushed them both up and towards the end of the futon using his knees, so that he was now on top of her, solving the blanket issue. It didn't solve the staring issue. Despite the cold that hit him, he looked into her eyes again, thus locking their gaze for even longer. Her raven hair sprawled out beneath her, and her expression held something akin to vulnerability, her face still red. However, they didn't move. You look like someone I knew. That thought whizzed through his mind, and he broke his gaze off. Closing his eyes, he rolled over to lay by her side, thanking Mother Nature for providing the cold to keep his senses. For a few minutes they both lay there, not saying anything, just listening to each other breathing. Oi! Ichigo said, trusting his voice again. Rukia turned her head towards him. What? I'm cold, he said, staring pointedly at the blankets she was lying on. She grinned mischievously. So? He growled softly. So, give me the blankets. Let me see. She put a finger to her lips, rolling her eyes upward, as if thinking. No. What? No. Ichigo grabbed the blankets from underneath her, despite her playful protests. Finally, she relented, allowing him to straighten out the blankets onto their futon, while she sat on the side watching. After he spread the blanket out, he crawled in under the covers before her, and pulled it over his head, making him a sizable lump on the futon. She grinned, all recent embarrassment forgotten, and joined him underneath the blankets. He lay there, his eyes open, looking at her as she got inside. When she finally settled, he closed his eyes, expecting nothing more. Ichigo. What? He said softly, not opening his eyes. I'm still cold. Ichigo opened one eye. He looked at her, cuddled up into herself. She looked adorable, a petite, cute, little girl. For some reason she seemed to draw him to her. But he resisted temptation, and instead grinned, not opening his other eye. So, he repeated her earlier jest, causing her to pout. Boomf. He ignored her, closed his eyes, this time almost going off to sleep. Rukia disturbed him again, by silently creeping up to him and hugging him to her. He let out a loud sigh to make sure she could hear him. After a couple of seconds, he finally put his hands around her body, and pulled her closer to him. Rukia grinned to herself. That sigh from him was definitely a sigh of defeat. Well, she really was cold. She closed her eyes, thankful for the second time that there were no stupid meetings to go to. A Summer Job, Business Trip, Part 5. Ichigo woke up, and looked into the sleeping face of Rukia. Except, this time he remembered where he was, and he wasn't too shocked. He pulled back a little, but their faces were still a few inches apart. He studied her while she was sleeping. Her facial expression was soft as she breathed in and out. Her faint pink lips were slightly open, and tendrils of raven-colored hair cascaded down her face. She looked peaceful, he decided, discarding the other word he was going to use. Rukia opened her eyes, and met dark brown orbs that bored into her eyes. If she hadn't been lying down she would have jumped back. Something strong was in his eyes. They lay there, looking at each other, head sideways on the futon. A few seconds of silence passed. Ichigo, Rukia said, but her voice was almost soundless. He didn't answer her, but kept his gaze. About, last night, no, she corrected herself, about Kayandano. His gaze turned slightly questioning. I said you didn't have to. He was cut off by Rukia, who placed a finger on his lips. The contact stopped his words. So he turned silent, but his eyes still searched her face. I want to. She turned her gaze from him, focusing on the clean white sheets instead. Kayandano, he was, someone really special to me. She paused, looking in his eyes. A hint of jealousy lay behind his dark brown orbs. Not, like that. She reassured him. He was the only one who really accepted me, outside of Renji. Ichigo stayed silent. But Renji, he accepted me because he knew me from when I was young. She paused. Kayandano, he accepted me before he even knew me, that's what I liked about him. And, Kayandano was Kakaku's brother. Ichigo's eyes opened slightly wider. She sighed. For some reason, I don't know, but you really look like him. She paused, fingering his collar without looking him in the eye. That should probably explain why we were all gaping at you. Those were his clothes, after all. His brown eyes reflected thoughtfulness. His wife. She stopped here, and she clenched his clothes a bit harder. She could feel him staring at her, but she didn't look up at him. Afraid to look up at him. Yes, his wife, she was the woman that I wanted to be like. She was nice. She acted properly. Her team members respected her, and she deserved it, you know. She stopped to recollect her memories. She was, a lady. Ichigo continued to look at her. She sighed before continuing. We were happy, I was happy, seeing Kayandano every day, learning from him, learning from his wife, he was so nice to me. Still clenching his collar, she put her head forward, so that it rested on his chest. But one day, he died. She choked out the last few words. The light in the room seemed to darken, like a cloud had just gone over the sun. She closed her eyes and sobbed softly, barely aware that Ichigo had put his arms around her. She opened her eyes when she was firmly in his grasp. There. It's okay. He patted her back. She tightened her fists. But, it isn't okay. It isn't okay. She yelled into his chest, and felt him tighten his grip. It is, she heard him insist. It isn't. She said, laughing harshly. I killed, Kayandano. With that, she collapsed onto his chest again, sobbing involuntarily. Ichigo just held her there, shocked, but knowing that she needed him. When she quietened down a little, he cleared his throat and spoke into her raven black hair. I'd like to say that, I understand, but, I don't. He paused for emphasis. He wasn't good at long-winded speeches that comforted people. I won't ask any more from you. Another pause. But, I'm here, for you. He stopped. If you want, he added as an afterthought. She didn't say anything but tried to pull herself closer to him, spilling her tears on his clothes. It was a while before he felt her petite body breathing normally. He pulled away from her slightly, and tipped her chin up with his index finger. She looked up at him, the path of recent tears glistening with the light in the room. Are you, all right now? She nodded slowly, putting a little pressure on his finger when she moved her chin. He shifted his body, and with his other hand dried her slightly damp face, and all the while she looked at him, unblinking. He tried to ignore her steady gaze. When he had finished, he kept his hand on the side of her face, marveling how it fit perfectly on his hand. She kept her unwavering gaze. Rukia, I can't imagine what you've gone through, but I'm always here, okay? He saw her eyes start to slowly fill with tears again. He placed his hands over her eyes and gently made her close them. He did not want to see her cry again. Even so, he still felt the tears dampen his hand. Instinctively he leaned in and gently kissed her lips, not taking off his hand that covered her vision. He drew back after he felt her stop crying. Sorry, he mumbled sheepishly, and then turned around so that his back was facing Rukia. He missed the pleasantly surprised expression on her face. What the hell did I do that for? Now she'll hate me for sure. He lay there, his eyes squeezed shut. Hopefully she'll forget about it. He uttered a small grunt of surprise when he felt her cuddle into his back. He turned around quickly, only to find her cuddled up underneath the blanket, eyes closed, and a small smile on her face. Rukia? No answer. Rukia. He shook her gently, but she did not open her eyes. Pfft. He scowled. No one fell asleep that quickly. But, he let it go, and almost as an instinct, reached around her protectively. As he drew her closer to him, he felt her lean into his embrace. He sighed, placed his chin on top of her raven black hair, and closed his eyes. Ichigo changed back into the GI in Hakama. But now, he knew why Rukia had looked at him weirdly when he had donned these clothes. So this was, Kyan's clothes, huh? He finished changing, and then crept back to the futon where Rukia still slept. Rukia. He shook her gently. If we stay any longer, we'll have to pay for another day. Rukia cracked open an eyelid. I'm getting up, I'm getting up. Ichigo leaned back, and knelt down beside the futon, as she sat up, rubbing her eyes. She looked at him, kneeling there, and her eyes widened slightly. Oh, you've changed. She sat there, thinking for a few seconds. I'll change as well. Ichigo just stayed where he was. I said, I'm going to change as well. Ichigo blinked, then gave her a blank look. And? She scowled. If you dare even peek the tiniest bit. Ichigo blushed furiously. You idiot. As if I would look when you were changing. She eyed him carefully. Then got out of the bed. I'm warning you. She said as she walked behind him to her folded clothes. She was back to her old self. Okay. I'm not even looking, he threw his arms up, exasperated. She pulled off her clothes quickly, and picked up the jeans. She pulled them on, still self-conscious of the teenager behind her. After she had tightened the belt on her jeans, she bent down to pick up her top. She pulled it on, only to have it fall at the shoulders. Crap. I can't tie the knots up. She held it up with her hands, then turned around, trying not to blush as she called Ichigo. Oi. For the last time, I'm not looking. It's not that. I've, finished. Finally. It took you. He was cut off by her voice. Could you help me again? She was standing behind him, her hands holding up her top. Don't you dare say anything, she growled as she saw him stifle a giggle. She waited till he calmed down, and then stepped lively in front of his kneeling position, and then sat down cross-legged. She was glad that she wasn't looking at him, because she felt her face heating up. In the meantime, Ichigo was also glad she wasn't looking at him, because he visibly blushed at the sight of her bare milky back. Yeah, knots, right. He mumbled to himself as he started on the first set of strings. As he finished tying the first knot up, he remembered what he had said at the Shiba household. What? So you're going to go out dressed like that? He shook his head. He couldn't believe he had said that. When, in actual fact, he actually thought the way she looked was cute, he decided. Rukia, he muttered, as he finished tying up the second knot. Sorry about before. An awkward pause. When I, told you off about your clothes. Back at Kakaku's place. Was it just him, or did she just let out a small sigh? I, actually thought it looked, pretty cute, cool. He finished lamely, blushing over his mistake. He hurriedly finished tying up the knots, to hide his embarrassment, missing her mischievous grin that spread over her blushing face. I hope you enjoyed your stay, the attendant said brightly, with a smile that looked too sincere, Ichigo noted as he walked out of the inn. His sweat dropped as Rukia returned the smile, fake sincerity and all. As Rukia turned around he scowled at the attendant, annoyed with her cheery attitude. She just winked at him. Ichigo shivered, and turned around hurriedly. A few minutes later they were walking again in silence, but it was comfortable. The way they were traveling didn't have much people on it, and Ichigo was glad for the serenity, because it gave him time to think and sort out his newly found feelings. He decided that, on the way back from this stupid lake, they would definitely sleep in different rooms. It confused his mind when she was so close. He looked down at her, walking along happily, something that he hadn't seen in a long time. This was the way it should be, he thought to himself. She should be happy, he thought again, not realizing that the frown lines on his forehead had started to disappear when he was together with Rukia. Well, only when they weren't fighting. Like now, for instance. Rukia, are you sure you know where we're going? Of course. You've never been here before. So. I still know. Just how do you know? I got a map. Let me see that. It's upside down. Shut up. Pfft. Women. They can never read maps. Smack. Ow. What was that for? A summer job, Operation TA, Part 2. He was dressed in a smart black uniform, but it was tattered in uncountable places. Rips revealed more rips on his body, and blood oozed out of his skin. More blood rolled down the side of his face, matching the color of his loose long hair. His surroundings included swings, a seesaw, and a sandbox. Renji lay on his stomach top of the wooden park bench, his legs hung lazily over the side of the seat, and his arms hung loosely at his sides. Little pools of blood gathered on the soil below him, disrupting the continuing color of the ground. Some pools had already dried, mixing in with the grainy soil, becoming dark patches in the morning light. Little clouds of breath rose from the direction of his face as he lay there, looking at the ground. Just breathing. Just breathing. His chest heaved at every breath, as if it was a chore to breathe. Which, it was. His long red hair covered the side of his face as it drooped down to touch the sandy ground. Flashback. Hush. The two vice-captains looked around warily. You can feel it too, right? Yeah. The vice-captain known as Aburai Renji answered. The other vice-captain known as Hisagi kept quiet, but his eyes remained alert and searching. They're opposite each other, the boy with white hair commented. I wonder why. He let his voice trail off, leaving the other two behind him to clutch the handles of their soul slayers. Hitsugaya spun around, nearly startling the other two. He looked at Hisagi, then Renji. Okay, since they are both far from one another, it means that we have to split up. No reaction. Hitsugaya nodded to himself. They could almost be considered veterans, those two. Well, they had fought longer than him, even though they were a lower rank than him. He looked at Renji, undoubtedly the stronger of the two. You, go alone. Renji nodded. It was expected. The captain was expected to report on the success of both vice-captains. Even though he wasn't the best of friends with the white-haired genius, he knew that Hitsugaya pretty much knew his abilities. Hisagi, however. The boy's voice brought him back to reality. Hisagi, you'll fight the stronger one. He held up his index finger, as Renji opened his mouth to protest. Just to be safe, you can take out the weaker one. If something were to happen, and I wasn't there. The red-haired vice-captain growled something under his breath, but much to Hitsugaya's relief, he let the matter slide. Even though Renji did like to argue with pretty much anyone about pretty much everything, he did hold some respect for the white-haired genius, who graduated from the Shinigami Academy in a year. Hisagi, Hitsugaya turned back to the other vice-captain. Basically, you'll be fighting by yourself. I won't step in at all, even if it looks bad. However, if you look like you might die, that's when I'll come in. He paused for emphasis. I'll just be noting the way you fight. Stepping back, he eyed the two Shinigamis. You'll be all right. That is all. The next second, all of them disappeared, leaving wisps of dust where they were standing. Renji felt the wind rush past his face as he headed towards where the Arrancar was located. As he flash-stepped closer and closer, emotions began to run high in his head. After all, it had just been this afternoon when he had confessed to Rukia. Rukia. He juggled the name in his brain. Rukia, his first love, his only love. He thought she would be around forever, giving him time to think about his feelings. But, he had waited too late. She had gone on a mission, and never returned the same. That guy, Kurosaki Ichigo. Even though, he and Ichigo shared a bond almost akin to brothers, he still acted the wall of jealousy between them. After all, Ichigo, even though he wouldn't even admit it to himself, felt strongly for Rukia. Renji could see it, it was just like his love for Rukia. The thing was, Rukia felt the same thing towards Ichigo. DMN that BSTRD. The presence of the Arrancar became more acute, every flash step. Probably within the next 2 flash steps he would see whom he was up against. He cast aside his thoughts, and concentrated all his anger into the figure that had just appeared in front of him. The Arrancar was bigger than any normal human being, about 2 times the height of Renji. Sideways, it measured about the same size as Renji's height. In other words, it was big. It carried its Soul Slayer the traditional style, at its hip. When Renji came upon it was kneeling by a brick house, looking in through a window. It was just about to put its hand in the window when Renji charged at full speed towards its gruesome head. Thunk! His fist came in contact with the brute's head, and he felt the bulky weight shift, slowly at first, then faster and faster. Thud! The Arrancar hit the pavement a few meters away, and Renji jumped back after his punch. All his anger at Ichigo had been concentrated into that punch, so he was pretty confident that it hurt the monster. The Arrancar wiped a trickle of blood from its jaw as it slowly stood up. Renji eyed it arrogantly from a few meters back. Just out of its hitting range. The Arrancar saw the range and grinned a toothy grin. "Oh, I was wondering when you'd be coming." Its voice sounded harsh, laced with sarcasm, and obvious disgust at Shinigami's. In a hurry to die? Renji raised an eyebrow. In a hurry to save humans? The Arrancar smiled cruelly again, its pudgy face making its beady eyes become smaller. Pick on someone your own size. Renji said flatly, then drew his Soul Slayer, casting a small glance to the window where the Arrancar had been. The Arrancar proceeded to draw his. A bit rude, don't you think? Not introducing yourself before a battle. I was told that was your custom. Renji shrugged. It won't matter if you're dead, right? The Arrancar grinned. Right. Better for me anyway. He readied himself. Though, you did say something earlier. He watched as the bored face of the red-haired Shinigami changed to a questioning look. You said, pick on someone your own size. I'm afraid if I did that, I wouldn't have anyone to pick on. Since. Renji gasped. The Arrancar's spirit force had suddenly skyrocketed, and the shock drove him to one knee. Sheet. That BSTRD masked his spirit force. The Arrancar took one look at the Shinigami in front of him, and smiled his evil toothy smile. Won't matter if I'm dead, eh? His smile turned to a frown as he saw the expression on the Shinigami's face. He was smiling. Heh. Renji straightened himself against the spirit force. You arrogant BSTRD, hiding your spirit force like that. He readied himself. That won't matter. Looks like it'll be a little extra playtime for me then. The Arrancar growled. How dare this mere Shinigami talk like he was stronger? He could sense his spirit force. It was exceptional, but not bigger than his own. So you can talk trash. He met the red-haired Shinigami's gaze. Let's see if that's supported by that puny amount of spirit power you're showing off. He watched as the Shinigami grinned. Shut up, grime face. Let's fight. The Arrancar growled and charged forward, each footstep shaking the ground. Renji waited, then flash-stepped behind the big monster. Spirit force is useless, if you can't connect, he said behind the Arrancar. The Arrancar turned around with a shocked look on his face. Renji just grinned, and brought his Soul Slayer down to contact, empty air. He slowly looked behind him, and sure enough the big guy was behind him, lifting his Soul Slayer to crush him. Sheet. With that thought in his mind, Renji jumped forward, barely avoiding the Soul Slayer as the Arrancar bore it down on the ground, cracking the pavement. The Arrancar grinned, obviously happy that he had shocked the Shinigami. Thought you could beat me that easily? Think again. That spirit force of yours, even if it did connect, would be useless anyway. Renji muttered something under his breath. Scared? The Shinigami said nothing for a few moments. Then, howl, Zabumaru. The words cut the cool air. Renji looked up and grinned a grin just as evil as the Arrancar. The Arrancar watched as the normal sword shape transformed itself into a mean-looking segmented sword with teeth. Get ready to die. Pfft. And just how, may I ask? He was answered indirectly by the sword extending from where the Shinigami stood and almost meeting him in the face. The Arrancar jumped back suddenly wary. Did that answer your question, Slimeball? The second attack came, and the sword reached further than the last. The Arrancar jumped back a second time, as the sword named Zabumaru whirled around the Shinigami's head. Know what? The Arrancar looked down at the Shinigami. The point of the extending attack isn't to hit the target. As soon as those words were out of his mouth, he leant back and threw his sword once more. This time, however, the sword didn't go directly at the Arrancar, rather it took an oval path so that the end of the sword was behind it. The Arrancar grinned. Looks like you missed, Shinigami boy. His grin turned to an expression of shock and pain as Zabumaru drew back to its normal position, cutting deeply into the Arrancar's leg as it passed. As Zabumaru came back to its normal position, the Shinigami laughed harshly. I said, the point is not to hit the target, instead, it goes behind it, and rakes the flesh as it comes back. I see. The Arrancar straightened, ignoring its fresh wound. Since you have shown me your Shirkai, I suppose I should do the same. The Shinigami said nothing. The Arrancar looked at the expression on his face, bored. You won't be bored after this, boy. A pause. Poison, Pinsithar. Instantly, the Soul Slayer that he had been holding with both hands seemed like it melded into the Arrancar front arm bones. For a while, nothing seemed to be happening, but then the monster let out a groan as the bones moved out of his arms, revealing vicious blades. They were long and thin, closely resembling syringes. The Arrancar slowly turned his hands around to look at them. Renji noticed that now they had small handles of some sort. The Arrancar clenched his fists, and by doing so, pulled on the handle. A squirt of some substance popped out the top of its respective blade. The Arrancar grinned at Renji. Hey, Shinigami boy. These things are loaded with deadly poison. He stopped for emphasis. But it won't kill you straight away. You'll suffer terribly first. But, you will die, no matter what. The Shinigami shrugged. Whatever. Can I kill you now? His uncaring tone aroused anger in the Arrancar. You little brat. He lunged at Renji, only to find that his thin blade pierced empty air. You went behind me again, stupid. Without thinking, the Arrancar used the thing Shinigamis called flash steps and found himself behind Renji. Not even allowing himself a quick grin, he pulled his blade back, with the intent to stab the offending Shinigami. As he pulled his hand back, the Shinigami disappeared and reappeared on top of his arm. The sword named Zabumaru swung up and down, but the Arrancar lifted its other hand and caught the blade, ignoring the sharp stabs of pain it sent down his hand. Gripping it for an instant, he threw it forward, watching as the owner and the blade collided into the brick house where he had been trying to snack on some girl that had a little spiritual power. Thud. The Shinigami looked up at the Arrancar, from his position on the cluttered bricks. Blood ran down his forehead freely, and his hair band was gone, ripped in the collision. But the Shinigami smiled. Good, good, I wanted to have some fun. He pushed himself out of the rubble of the wall, and readied himself one more time. Oh, and before, when you said you wouldn't have anyone to pick on. I'll let myself be picked on, he paused, re-gripping Zabumaru. That is, if you can handle it, slime face. The Arrancar tried to open his mouth, but found that he couldn't. The Shinigami had just unleashed his spirit power, and the Arrancar found that his body didn't respond well to the shock. It was now he that went down on one knee. You were hiding that spirit power. He managed to get out. The Shinigami only grinned. Time to die. But something had caught his eye. The Arrancar turned to look where the Shinigami was looking. The girl he had tried to snack on was now standing outside in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes, as if trying to believe that the massive hole in her house was real. What the, how can she be standing when this guy just released a huge amount of spirit force? Abarai, Kun. The voice was laced with disbelief. They knew each other. But, how could this mere human see a Shinigami? Sheet. I didn't want to get anyone involved, Renji thought. Tatsuki, he barked. Get back in the house. What? Tell me what the hell you're doing here. And why are you holding a sword? There's no time for that. Get back in the house, he growled. The Arrancar simply observed the Shinigami's actions. It was obvious that the Shinigami had a larger spirit force than him, however, if he had attachments to this girl named Tatsuki. It was a low way of fighting, but if he wanted to survive. He lunged at the girl, extending Pinsethar. Tatsuki. The red-haired Shinigami dived in front of the human girl, who had just stood there, dumbfounded. In her anger and surprise at seeing the Shinigami, she had completely missed the Arrancar. The Arrancar grinned once again as Pinsethar pierced the Shinigami. Just as he had hoped. Why you? The Shinigami growled as it held the blade that now had residence in his shoulder. He was cut off when the Arrancar squeezed his fist, and Renji's eyes opened in pain. Sheet, the poison, injection. The Arrancar opened his mouth to laugh, but it never came. Renji grabbed hold of the blade, and ripped it out of his shoulder. A cruel light began to shine from his eyes. The girl behind him had dropped to her knees in confusion. Stay there, Tatsuki, he growled. Something in the Shinigami's voice had changed. It was a more commanding tone. Hey, slimeball. There's one thing you need to know. My name is Abarai Renji. Pleased to meet you, the Arrancar said sarcastically. My name is. But the Shinigami never got to find out his name, nor did the Arrancar get to tell him. Renji had swung Zabumaru in an underarm motion, extending it at the same time. It cut the Arrancar from under its arm to its head, splitting its jaw. Blood spurted out of the wound, and the arm slowly slipped down the side of its body. The bone-like syringes slowly withered away, and then was joined by the rest of the Arrancar's body. Renji turned around, to where Tatsuki was kneeling, too shocked to say anything. DMN girl. With a short and swift motion, he hit the back of her head. As she fell forward he caught her, and carried her just inside the front door, noting how big and expensive her house looked. Closing the door to ensure no one suspected anything, never mind the huge hole in the brick wall, he walked slowly away from the house. Hitsugaya, Taicho. He thought he could sense them, they were somewhere. He followed his senses, walking drowsily. That DMN poison. He kept walking, but his arm hurt like hell. He needed to find Hitsugaya Taishu, he could probably do something about it. As he shuffled slowly in the early hours of the morning he stumbled over a wooden bench. Too tired and injured to get up, he lay there, and closed his eyes. The last thought that ran through his mind was, Tatsuki's house looks really expensive. End flashback. He must have been there for at least 3 hours. Pain racked his body, but he didn't move, because it hurt more. He stared down at the ground, noting that he could now see a bit more clearly. It was the beginning of a new day, he decided, because he could feel the sun on his back. He wondered briefly where Hitsugaya Taishu and Hisagi were. A shadow crossed the sunlight, and Renji tried looked up to glare at the offender that had blocked his sunlight. The sudden JRK brought an onslaught of pain that knocked him out. The shadow became bigger as it neared his body. Strong hands gripped the sides of his muscular body and lifted him up. A few minutes later, the only thing that was left at the park was footprints, and dried blood. A Summer Job, Operation TA, Part 3. Ha! Ha! Puffs of semi-white clouds rose above the vice-captain's face. In the cool of the early morning, breath actually materialized. Hisagi shook his head. This wasn't the time to be marveling about things in the human world. Now was the time to be worried about the thing in front of him. The Arrancar eyed his foe. The Shinigami seemed to be thinking of other things. I'm bored. The Shinigami's face looked up immediately. What? You are. The Arrancar's voice trailed off, and its head tilted sideways as if trying to smell something. Oh. Looks like your friend got his but handed to him, the Shinigami said coolly, noting that the once huge spirit force given out by the other Arrancar had diminished to nothing. The Arrancar hid its expression. Crap. I can't believe that he lost. The Arrancar looked back at the Shinigami in front of him. That just means that I need to take care of you faster to kill the person that killed my fellow Arrancar. Pfft. Hisagi reached up to wipe some blood that had found its way down the side of his cheek. That's fine with me. I'll let you join your friend. Hisagi rushed at him, flash-stepping to bring himself forward with great acceleration. Sitting in a tree, not far from where the two crossed blades, Hitsugaya was jotting down notes on a piece of paper, occasionally lifting his head up to observe the battle. It was a long-winded one, and he definitely had to comment on Hisagi's endurance. Excels in both endurance and stamina. Skills are still sharp even later in the battle. Displays excellent use of flash steps, and Soul Slayer skills. Hitsugaya looked down at his notes. Blah, blah, blah. No point in writing an extremely detailed report. Everyone knew that Hisagi was going to achieve captaincy anyway. It wasn't like there was anyone better. Except for Renji. But other than that, who else would try out for captain, and actually defeat Hisagi or Renji? His mind flitted across the vice-captains. His own idiot vice-captain could probably fight well with Hisagi, but there was a sheer power gap between her and Renji. Renji had just been too obsessed with beating Byakuya that he left all the other vice-captains behind. Plus, most vice-captains were reasonably content with their position. He had a sneaky feeling that Hisagi was only trying out for captain, not because he wanted to, but because he felt an obligation to, since his captain was, after all, one of the traitors. Lost in his train of thought, he nearly fell off his perch when he felt a huge amount of spirit force weigh down on him. Sheet. Who the heck is emitting that? As he steadied himself, he cast his eyes over to where the fight was. It seemed that the Arrancar had just let loose his spirit power. So that Arrancar was just hiding it all along, eh? This will go on the reports. Hisagi looked like he was having trouble, but nothing too serious. The spirit power was huge, but the vice-captain was coping well. However, to counter the hidden spirit force, he put his Soul Slayer in Shirkai form. It was a good choice. Putting the Soul Slayer in Shirkai form would help him immensely. Hitsugaya continued to watch the battle, until it was clear that the Arrancar was simply toying with him. The Arrancar's spirit force had just continued going up. It wasn't reasonable to expect a vice-captain to fight with an Arrancar with that massive spirit force. It was almost like asking a vice-captain to fight against a captain. However, against all odds, Hisagi looked like he was coping. Hitsugaya raised his pen, ready to write down that Hisagi coped extremely well in hopeless positions, when the Arrancar disappeared from sight. This wasn't good. Without thinking, Hitsugaya Flash stepped towards the battle, breaking the branch he had been perched on in the process. "I've got you." "Sheet." Hisagi turned around, knowing that the Arrancar was behind him. He saw the blade come down, but funnily enough it never connected. Instead, he heard the sound of a book closing. Hitsugaya Taishu. The young captain had stepped in between them, and had caught the sword in his notebook. Hitsugaya looked up at the vice-captain. "Protocol demands that I come in now. This guy," he gestured at the Arrancar, "is actually of captain level." The Arrancar looked down in disbelief at the short guy that had managed to catch his sword swing in midair, and with a book of all things. He jumped back, eyeing the newcomer arrogantly. Short, whitish hair, and wearing a white cloak. He fit the description. Captain of the 10th Division, Hitsugaya Tushuru. Also known as Genius. The person looked up at the sound of his name. "I'm honored that you know the name of your killer." "Don't be an arrogant little brat," the Arrancar replied smoothly. The brat fixed him with an icy glare. "You will die. You seem very sure of that." "It's true. We outnumber you." "Oh, so the proud captain will use a dirty method, will he? Or am I just too strong for you?" The white-haired genius didn't answer, but tucked the notebook away, and drew his sword. The Arrancar's eyes narrowed. He had heard about this captain. His Soul Slayer was the most powerful Ice-type Soul Slayer in the whole of Soul Society. He was no easy foe. The person he had been fighting with, Hisagi, wasn't that easy either. The guy was too persistent, and had made him lose too much stamina. He wasn't in the best mood to fight, so. "Look, I'm in a hurry. Watch carefully, for this is what you will die by." With that, he concentrated all his spirit power into his Soul Slayer, while the two Shinigamis watched. His Soul Slayer slowly expanded to reveal a large saber-like sword. The two Shinigamis looked bored. The Arrancar grinned to itself. The next thing that happened would surely shock them. The metal from the sword worked its way down and almost slid past the hilt. It rolled over his hands and then onto his arms. Before their very eyes the metal hardened into blades on his hands, but it didn't stop there. The metal continued to engulf every portion of the Arrancar's body. Finally, when it had covered every single inch, the rest of the metal hardened, making the Arrancar glint in the early morning sun. This isn't just armor. This is a weapon. The Arrancar looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers. "My Shikai provides me with a sword that can be connected to my body. It also provides armor that is as sharp as any sword. Touch it, and you'll find out." Hitsugaya didn't doubt the words of the Arrancar. His armor certainly did look sharp. If he threw himself carelessly at the Arrancar, he would have definitely cut. He threw a sideways glance to Hisagi. Good. The guy was unperturbed. That would have to go down in the report. But later. Then he noticed the expression of the vice-captain change, and suddenly Hitsugaya knew why. Renji's spirit force. It had just gone. Just disappeared. The Arrancar noticed their expressions, and then laughed in an oddly metallic way. "I see. Your friend's spirit force has disappeared. Do you know why?" The two Shinigamis focused back on him. "Because, that guy he fought. He was known as the polluter. The poison he manufactured was deadly, so deadly that he thought it was boring. So, he made a poison that would surely kill, but it would torment the person for weeks before killing them. Looks like your friend missed out on the weeks bit." The shorter, and obviously stronger Shinigami growled. "Enough talk." The Arrancar's eyes narrowed. "I agree." The Arrancar let out another harsh laugh. "Don't be in a hurry to die." And with that, he sped towards them so fast that he became a streak of silver. Hisagi barely had time to deflect the blow. Faster than usual, Tattoo Boy. Hisagi struck back with a vehemence that startled his captain counterpart. The Arrancar was sent flying back a few meters, but unhurt. Hitsugaya noted. It was like fighting a sword. Hitsugaya just grinned. We don't have much time. We need to find Renji. He's dead, the silver Arrancar said flatly. The white-haired genius promptly ignored him. Radio back to Soul Society, and ask for backup for Renji. I'll take care of this guy while you're radioing. He paused, looking at the worried look on the vice-captain's face. Don't worry, I've already written down all the battle details. The Shinigami disappeared. Yes, that's it. We have lost sense of Renji's spirit force, and Hitsugaya is now currently battling the second Arrancar. Is the second Arrancar difficult? It was hiding its spirit force. A short pause. Okay, for now, keep fighting the Arrancar. After Hitsugaya finishes the Arrancar, see if you can look around for Renji. If you can't find him by the day ends, come back. We'll send a proper search team, if he is. The voice on the other line trailed off. Hisagi swallowed. Yes sir. Good, that gets rid of the trash. Hitsugaya raised an eyebrow. Actually, I would have done it myself, except I'm not fond of the technological stuff. He eyed the Arrancar. Aren't you going to tell me your name? You won't need my name where you're going. I don't think you understand, Arrancar. The boy genius grinned. I need to know the name of the person I killed. Hitsugaya flash-stepped towards the Arrancar. He brought his sword down on the body of the Arrancar, intending to sever him from the waist down. Ching! Hitsugaya frowned from his position behind the Arrancar. There was no way that the Arrancar had blocked his blow. Up to the last millisecond he was sure that he had seen the Arrancar's saber sword still pointing towards the ground. He felt the Arrancar's gaze shift to him, and then heard him laugh. Oh, that was quite a vicious slicing attack. Look what it did. Nothing. The last few words came out as a sneer. The young captain straightened up and looked at the sliver Arrancar behind him. Crap. That was a slicing attack with such sharpened spiritual energy that it would have cut Zaraki. Yet this, Arrancar stands here with not even a scratch. The Arrancar grinned his metallic grin. Surprised? Don't worry, you aren't weak, that slice would have cut a building in half. The Arrancar drew his sword up in front of him. However, the armor on my body is basically a sword. You want to know my name? I'll tell you. I am known as, the Saber. The Shinigami in front of him didn't say anything. Then, he straightened up, and looked the Arrancar in the eye. I'll just have to break the saber, won't I? The Arrancar grinned cruelly. I can't break. No normal sword will be able to beat me. Hitsugaya uttered a sharp laugh. I don't have a normal sword. With that, he placed his sword in front of him. He muttered something incomprehensible to the Arrancar, but suddenly the sun seemed to disappear. The Arrancar watched with interest as a huge dragon appeared from the Shinigami's sword. So this is your Shirkai? The boy said nothing, but swung his sword in a downwards motion. The silver Arrancar just stood there as the huge blue ice dragon pummeled into him. The saber lived up to his name, the blue dragon split into two as it hit him. As the last inch of the dragon exploded, the Arrancar grinned, water dripping off his silver armor. Looks like my saber cut down your dragon. Easily. Hitsugaya just grinned. Know what happens when metal gets supercooled? The Arrancar looked puzzled for a moment, and then deciding it was some jest, tried to put his hands back to attack position. But it wouldn't budge. His whole body wouldn't budge. He looked down in horror, at the splashed water that had suddenly become ice. And not normal ice either. It was rock-solid ice.